On page 2, row 3, there are 3 squares. The first one we're going to do is the line series, then you have 2 texture boxes. So let's talk about line. Get my paper over there. Okay, what I want you guys to do in this square, and I think I've zoomed in a smidge too much, and I've shaken my camera. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at the different brushes and the type and quality of line that they make. We've been using, at least personally, because I have a preference for it, a lot of flat brushes. But you guys were also given quite a few pointed brushes. So some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger. Yours may not look exactly like mine. Your brush number 1, which is super fine tipped. I don't even know if I have a brush number 1 here. Oh, I do. Your brush number 1, which is super teeny tiny, may have like a red handle. It's what I had available in my classroom when we were pulling supplies. So what I want to do here is I want us to see what kind of lines we can make with our brushes. So we're going to use some pointed brushes, we're going to use some flat brushes, and I just want us to kind of see what we can do here. The other goal in mind is to create straight lines. So I want to see a nice, smooth, straight line, and one of the ways in which we can do that is the way in which we pull the brush. I'm going to actually zoom out quite a bit here so you guys can see what I'm doing. When I am making a fine line, it is a two-handed process. And so sometimes what I do is I will rest. I will use this hand because I'm right-handed. I will use my left hand as a support and then my right hand to pull. Okay, so when we're doing this, I'm almost like pushing against this part of my hand. Like you'll see, I'll use my pointer finger so that I'm kind of trying to remove that rocking that naturally occurs. The other thing I'm doing is I'm resting this part of my hand against the paper. So I'm actually going to leave this zoomed out so you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm going to turn mine a little bit. Remember, I've been working very vertically. If this works for you to turn your paper and cock it a little bit, that's totally fine. I actually prefer that when I'm working, but I was trying to do a nice video. So I'm actually going to start with the wider brush here. You should have a wide pointed brush, somewhere in the number range of 7. And when I'm talking about the number is located, let's see if I can get that in the... You can very vaguely see it. There's a number right there on the handle somewhere. So this is a number 7 brush. So I've got a little bit of water on my brush. Water is great. Water can also be your nemesis because water can, of course, we're working with watercolor paper, but water can actually pull the paint off underneath, or it can put a hole if you are working in with paper sometimes. Like if you get this completely soaked, you know, you could work a hole in the paper. So I've got a damp brush. Again, it's not soaking wet. If I were to squeeze it, you would barely feel or see any water on my tips. It just feels slightly damp. So I'm going to take my brush. More paint is not necessarily better here, so you guys can see how much paint I have on my brush. And I'm going to just turn this even more. And again, I'm going to be resting my hand and I'm going to pull towards me. I'm not going to push my brush away. And we want to do smooth strokes as we come across the paper. So again, and go until you can't, until you start to get some of that chattering across the page. But it's a really nice smooth stroke. More paint isn't better. I know I just said that. It's not like a pen where like if you have a whole bunch of paint up here, it'll like work its way down. That isn't what happens. And then the nice thing is that we're gonna do a couple of these until we start to run out. And then I'm going to show you now how to finish that. So let's say that we don't want to have, obviously, we want a nice clean line. Go back up a little bit into the part where it is not all chattery and broken. And you can clean up that line and make it nice and neat. See the comparison between the two? This one I went over very smoothly with that one. Notice I'm not doing short strokes. Let me show you what that looks like. If you do a bunch of short strokes in an attempt to make a straight line, you won't get a straight line. I know that probably doesn't look like it. I'm gonna zoom way in so you guys can see it. So there's all of these starts and stops and wobbles on this one, and so that isn't what we want to have in this situation. We want something that's going to be nice and smooth. I definitely did not get enough paint on my brush that time. Okay, now you will also want to give this a shot with perhaps your number 1 brush, which is your super fine brush. As always, you should have some paper towels or those rags to help, you know, get the excess water off your brush. My black has also been sitting out for a little while. So again, I don't have a ton of paint on my brush here. And I want you to see the difference in the fineness of the lines you can get. This is particularly helpful if you need to do an edge on something that's nice and clean. So you notice that, like, even though those brushes were pretty significantly differently sized, you can get a pretty fine line using a larger brush. One of the things you may find helpful is if your paint is particularly thick, is to add a tiny drop of water to help thin it out and get you that beautiful clean line. My paint is starting to get a little on the thick side, and so that's actually like the best line. And again, line work takes some practice, so that's why we're going to do this line series. So I want to see a variety of lines. If you do need a little bit of that black or wet or water into your paint, look how nice that looks. Okay, let's try it with one of the other brushes. I'm going to grab a smaller flat brush here. I'm going to grab a little bit of that black paint. And again, I'm not overloading my brush. And I want to see what happens when we do a straight edge. You can see a little bit of that water in the paint. So again, I'm bracing my hand with my finger. The side of my hand is resting on the table, and I'm trying to make a straight line. Okay, let's do that with that really big, wide one that we were using for our blending spheres and our blending exercises above. I'm going to grab a little bit of paint on there. Paint, and then I am going to grab and pull. And again, notice I'm doing a nice smooth stroke. Okay, and you don't have to do this in black. I just grabbed black because I knew it was going to be the most contrast worthy. You can absolutely see what this would feel like if you used a different color. Remember, some of our colors have different, like, like viscosities. They're like different thicknesses. Then I think a fun part of this exercise would be if you, because we've been working on this, what I call the pull stroke, to grab and do maybe a horizontal line and see how that feels differently to you. Trying to maintain that clean, straight edge. As always, having clean water to work with is pretty important in this situation. I think I got a little too much water on this brush. But again, I'll try to do a horizontal line. So again, that's pretty much what the line series is. I want to see you practice some lines, both thin and thick, with a variety of like directions and shapes. For the texture part, here we can zoom back out. For square number 1 and square number 2 is texture. Now, you can do any color you want here, and it really is about trying some of those different brushes and seeing how you can create texture using the brushes. Now I just realized I'm out of white paint, which is not what I wanted, but that's okay. We'll work with what we've got. So I'm going to grab a little blue here, and I'm going to see what kind of texture I can make with my blue brush. And again, just focusing on making some texture here. Then maybe I'm going to grab the green, see what happens when I add a little green here. And I'm using like a dabbing motion here. So I'm almost creating these little rectangles of color, just using the tips of the brushes. Now we do have to be careful. We have to treat our brushes with respect and care, because if we press our bristles too hard into our paper, we may find that we ruin our bristles. Now I'm seeing if I do sort of a longer stroke up here. This experimentation is really important for understanding the way the brushes work. So I've done a couple of different types of texture there. Maybe let's see what happens if I do some of this. Oops, as I totally knock that camera. So you can see, even though I haven't switched my brush at all, the way in which I use my brush allows me to create certain types of texture based on how I move the brush, how hard or soft I push. Okay, so I want to see one brush with all different types of movement and texture here. And then in texture 2, you're going to repeat that, except you're going to pick a different brush. So I did a flat brush there, and I'm going to grab a pointed brush for this one, and let's see what we can do here. So I want to see you can really see like the different quality of the types of texture you can get can also be dependent upon how much paint you put on your brush. So you can really see this is kind of one of those things that we talked about where paint almost becomes like a sculptural element. We talked about that quite a bit when we talked about like some of the Impressionist painters and Van Gogh, where they put a lot of paint onto their canvases, and that creates that actual real texture as opposed to implied texture. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to clean my brush off. if I do something that is, now I'm pressing harder with my brush and I'm doing something that's more of a smooth overlap here. So this is a totally different sort of texture. Okay, and let's see what happens if we were to do just something else here. Now I'm using like more of the side of the brush as opposed to just the tip. And again, this is about your experimentation, so your texture may look different than mine.